price of agrochemicals has gone up as well, the same as fuel, the same as fertilizer. So all in all, like parts, you name it, everything has gone up for the tillage farmer.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of AgriFocus, the podcast from Agriland. Today I'm joined by the Head of Crops Knowledge Transfer Department with Teagasc, Michael Hennessy, and we're going to talk all things tillage today because, let's face it, what is anyone else in the world talking about at the moment? Only crops, weather, harvest. It's the topic of conversation among farmers who aren't even involved in tillage at the moment. So Michael, thank you very much for joining us on AgriFocus. Can I start off, first of all, by looking at harvest time, Michael? Let's get an update there. I mean, what are crops looking like at the moment? What crops are in focus?
Well, I suppose, look, it's all winter crops at the moment. Winter barley would have been the first one out the door, and harvest started earlier than normal, and a lot of crops are coming in earlier than they normally would have. So, look, the first crops have probably started to harvest about 2 or 2.5 weeks ago at this stage, and we're still probably finishing off the winter barley in most of the country, just about finished up, but the northeast will be very different. There's an awful lot of crops still to be harvested up there. They really haven't had much of a break to kind of get those crops out of it at all. So, so there's two ends of it. One, you have kind of a very wet crop on top, wet grain, which is very difficult, obviously, to get through the combine. And the wetter the grain is, the less valuable it is because it takes more money to dry it. Everything has to be dried back down to 15% moisture, and it's probably coming in some parts of the field in terms of those grain, it's probably, some of it's well over 20%, but once you're over that, you're really starting to lose money a little bit on it. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of winter barley in some parts of the country, and that's only the start of it. But in other parts of the country, it's a little bit maybe further advanced. Probably winter barley maybe in my part of the world here, and Carlow is probably just about finished. You go a little bit further south to Wexford and down around towards Cork. Probably not too far away from finished, I'd say. And people have moved on a bit into oilseed rape and oats. So the oilseed rape, it's only in the middle of doing that now. That's not, and it needs to be done. There's shedding already happening. So it's where you have your nice little pod. You have your 10 or 12 seeds in that. The pod can open a little bit and it'll just go straight down into the ground, and that's it. When it's down the ground, it's lost. So obviously, as you can imagine, the really heavy rain over the last long number of weeks certainly, but when crops are very ripe, they tend to split a little bit, and you can lose grain. So there's a bit of a panic out there to try and harvest that oilseed rape, but a lot of it's been done at higher moisture than people would like, and it's quite a financial penalty to that.
So the rush is on, I suppose, for the oilseed rape and the winter oats as the next couple of weeks unfold, Michael, I suppose, in different parts of the country. I mean, look, nowhere has avoided the deluge of rain over the last while, even the sunny southeast. But you were saying kind of the problem areas at the minute, not even going as far as the oilseed rape, even with winter barley, is the northeast.
Yeah, so in terms of, the northeast is, it's well behind. But if you're to look at the overall rainfall in July, it has been exceptionally wet. In Carlow, last year, if we remember, lovely July, we had 25 mils of rain in Carlow. The long-term average for Carlow is getting close to 60 mils of rain. This year, up to late last week, we had 109 mils of rain.
Wow.
So that'll give you the difference. So we're 187%, and we're not finished out the month yet. I haven't counted in what fell on Saturday and Sunday last.
Yeah.
Going to rain again tomorrow. Next weekend is not looking great. So look, what's happening there then is that crops are being pummeled by this rain, and some very heavy rain at times with some wind as well. Some of the straws brackling or breaking down, and some of those heads are going to the ground and being lost. Never mind the oilseed rape we talked about a second ago in terms of shedding. But also then on top of that, underneath then, we have soils now at field capacity. So in other words, they're full of water. So heavy machinery going in on top of that is not a good place to be, especially with the likes of heavy grain trailers being carted off it. So there's problems in every end you go. And then obviously then we have the other side of it. When farmers are out there trying to harvest winter barley, they're trying to go as low as they can towards the soil to grab those heads that are towards the very bottom. Now they've no stubble left, and what tends to happen is that stubble can sit up, or the straw can sit up on that stubble, so you can get air flowing all the way around it. You don't have that anymore. That's going to be extremely difficult to get straw in any sort of good condition. So the problems are mounting.
Yeah, I was just actually going to ask you there about straw. I mean, how much straw would you say, or would you have an idea in Teagasc how much straw has been lifted so far? And of course, like, tillage farmers are under extreme pressure as well with the 14-day thing under the nitrates,
Well, I wouldn't say there's 20% of straw baled.
Oh, okay.
Essentially, farmers where they have the crop in to be chopped, and they were never delighted in their lives to actually chop it and get rid of it and back onto the ground. But from the point of view of winter barley, that's, like I say, some of the earlier stuff has been harvested maybe 2.5 weeks ago. A lot of that's still on the ground. It's still there. We're well past 14 days, but sure, what can a farmer do? I mean, it'll take at least 3 really good days to get anyway close to that straw to be good enough to bale. But in fairness to farmers, for the most part, they're actually flat out trying to harvest. They're under combines, they're under tractors and trailers trying to get the grain out primarily. And straw, honestly, for lots of them is the least of their worries. So some of that straw will be, well past, or some of those fields will be well past this 14 days, certainly in this year. And to a degree, in a year like this, it is very difficult to comply with those rules.
Well, that's it. I know a couple of the representatives, like the likes of the Irish Grain Growers Group, and that have called for a bit of flexibility. I mean, I think there'll have to be no choice. Like, it's a bit of a force majeure. It's not as if the tillage farmers can control the weather. They're doing the best they can.
Well, look, there is, in the way those rules were written, there is the option for the minister to make a bit of a call on that. But look, in terms of what's occupying farmers' minds at the moment, it's all about harvest. It's trying to get the berries in the shed is the big one, and not necessarily the straw.
This is it. But just quickly staying on the straw element there, the straw incorporation measure, a good measure by all accounts, according to most tillage farmers. Do you have an idea of what sort of acreage is included in that now? From what I gather, everyone that applied will be covered.
That's what they're saying. There's 70,000 hectares, so that'll be up a little bit from previous years. So that's, it's a phenomenal amount. It just goes to show you. I mean, look, and to a degree, it's a bit of a reflection of, despite the concerns of the livestock sector, that there mightn't be enough straw out there. Last year, and there was, 60,000 hectares or something like that done last year, there was still straw in sheds. So there's still some of last year's straw there. So that's why people jump into that a little bit more. Look, it's a good measure from the point of view of putting that organic manure back into the soil that helps improve soils in the longer term. And look, there'll probably still be enough straw to go around, I'd say, thereafter. So
is that mostly coming from winter barley, Michael?
A lot of straw. Well, I mean, look, winter barley is a big crop for sure. It's 70,000 hectares, give or take. But spring barley is still a massive crop. It's 113 or 114,000 hectares, or 116,000 hectares. But the only thing is, there's two things in it. One is that, and straw might be might end up scarce, because number one, straw tends to lose a bit of its bulk if you throw it around the place 3 or 4 times. You spread it out, bring it back in, spread it out, bring it back in again. There wasn't as much straw in a lot of the winter barley this year as there would have been other years anyway. That's a bit of a common theme. About half of the spring barley that went in was probably on the early to sow it when you'd like to sow it, but half it wasn't. Half it was late. Those crops are looking very light, looking not great at all. Yields won't be great out of it, and straw yields, volumes will be very low on lots of those crops. So when you stick all those two together, there could be an awful lot less straw available there for sale.
You were talking about yields there, and I suppose value, and even the Teagasc mid-term or mid-review of its outlook for various sectors has been published this week. Now, it says what we pretty much knew from the National Farm Survey anyway. Tillage incomes are going to be down 50% this year. Is a lot of that to do with the weather, Michael?
It's a combination of a number of different factors. One, I suppose that there's an awful lot of fertilizer in the way you have to front load it into tillage crops. It was generally purchased when the price of that was, the industry, I suppose, were trying to hold the price of that as much as they could.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
And it has come back quite a lot. So there's an awful lot of expensive fertilizer in the system. There's an expensive fuel in the system as well, because it was all, there was more than half the crops are winter crops anyway. So a lot of them, the establishment was happening around then. The price of agrochemicals has gone up as well, the same as fuel, the same as fertilizer. So all in all, like parts, you name it, everything has gone up for the tillage farmer. Combined with that, you're looking at the value of grain, diving from just a little under 300 euros to now just a little over 200 euros. So 100 euros taken off a ton of grain. Oilseed rape probably come back by more, 150 euros. So, I mean, that has a massive, massive effect. Then you put on top of that, yields aren't nearly as big. Last year was just a fantastic year. We had all three, which is really unusual. We had great yields, we had great weather, and we had a great price. This year, it looks like we're going to have none. We don't have the good weather. Yields are only modest, and the price is only modest.
And the most things affecting the grain prices at the minute, is it the likes of, Ukraine, the Black Sea Grain Initiative? Is it affected by maize harvest in the US? What are the biggest factors?
I suppose you've named it, most of them. It's all of those. It's all about volume. It's about how much is in store and how much is predicted to be produced so that they can stick that in store. So the more grain that's be predicted to be supplied to the market, price will follow that downwards. Less there is, the price will follow it in the way up. So from the Ukraine war, there was Ukraine, I think it's the guts of 10% of world traded grain. It's often confused with 10% of the world grain production, which is just not right. It's of the traded grain, which is very different.
Traded grain.
Has a big effect because traded grain is where the price comes from, the overall price. And Irish farmers work on a world price, the same as everybody else out there. We're no different. The only differential between us and America or the UK is transport. That's it. Transport getting into the country. The only difference. So if it goes up by a tenner a ton somewhere else, around the world and on the trading markets, whether it's the life in France or in the UK market or in the Chicago Board of Trade, if it goes up by that amount there, it'll go up by that amount in Ireland. That's generally the way it works. So look, certainly the impact of Russia bombing the ports across in Odessa and various parts of Ukraine has had an effect of probably to the tune of 15, 17 euros a ton so far. But there's still an awful lot to play for in terms of the overall harvest, and there's huge eyes looking at America in terms of they're a bit dry at the moment, and they're looking at how much grain is actually going to come back out of America. So that's the bit that still is to be played for, and it's still, I suppose, a month or maybe 6 weeks out from having a better idea where that's going to get.
And do Irish tillage farmers, I know our own reporter Richard Halloran would have done quite a bit of coverage on this in the past about getting Irish tillage farmers into the idea of forward selling. It seems to be something that's not very prevalent. Well, it is, engaged in here, not massively prevalent among tillage farmers here, Michael.
It is from year to year, and I suppose to a degree, you go through a period of, you go back to 2012, there was a good bit of forward selling because 11 wasn't wonderful. 12 looked like it was going to be a great year to forward sell, but as in it was sold in the back end of 11 into early 12. But while it didn't turn out to be a great harvest, people had oversold and they couldn't supply the grain, and the price of grain either ways went up quite a bit. People just lost. As far as they could see, if I would have sat on my hands, I would have made more money than forward selling. That lives on in the memory. So 3 or 4 years go by and people don't do anything, and then they get back into it again. And then lo and behold, you turn around to last year. People would have forward sold, into the back end of 21 with relatively good prices there. But from September onwards, once I suppose things became a little bit clearer, the price just kept going up and up and up all the way to last May. Now, the clever people, if they were really clever, would have sold everything last May, but very hard to sell on a rising market. And the really clever people not only would have sold 2022's harvest in May, they would have sold 23 harvest in May. But there wasn't too many people who did that because everybody's looking at the rising market is going to go on forever. But I suppose when it came to harvest, people who forward sold, they didn't do so well. People who sat in their hands did very well. So there's that lives again on memory. So it is a case, and we would be encouraging farmers to sell as well in Teagasc. We've been doing it for years, and we reckon that's especially where rented land is in the system. It's a brilliant way of essentially you buy your expensive fertilizer, you sell some of your grain, you kind of hedge it on that side of it. You don't sell too much, you don't sell any more than 60% of your harvest, and you sell little and often. That is the way. And you're never going to get beaten by a big price or a poor price, but your average price hopefully will be a good average price.
And Michael, in terms of land then for tillage, obviously they want to increase it, and that ties in with food security and the National Fodder Committee and so on. And is there a competition? Are you getting that feedback through Teagasc, through advisors? Are you getting the feedback that the tillage farmers are finding it that bit more difficult to get land, maybe because they're in competition with the likes of other sectors for land now because of nitrates restrictions?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, tillage farmers have lost a huge amount of land to dairy farmers, and specifically dairy farmers, because they're able to get out and it's way more profitable on a per hectare basis in comparison to tillage. And they essentially are not, a lot of dairy farmers have decided they're not going to reduce their numbers, they're just going to increase their area. That's the way they're going to deal with it. And the available land generally tends to be tillage land, unfortunately. So yes, lots of land has been lost out of the system, and probably will continue to be so, because I mean a tillage farmer coming into the 24 harvest is not exactly going to be flush with a huge amount of cash, because as you say, the income is going to be down quite a lot. And in some cases, I think it might be down an awful lot more, and we still have a lot to play for in this harvest. So that's probably more than likely going to continue to happen, unless there is, look, there's a couple of things probably need to happen, to my view at least. We need to be a little bit more creative. I think there's a lot of those dairy farmers don't particularly want that land, they just need it for regulation. And they don't particularly want to manage extra land, I should say. And I think there's probably lots of clever ways that the tillage farmer and the dairy farmer can come together to farm that land to the advantage of both parties. I don't think that's an insurmountable problem. And there may be levers that the department can pull in there as well to incentivize that. Be that around slurries, or be that around tax incentives, or be that around various other different mechanisms out there. But I think there is as you rightly say, there's an ambition to increase the tillage area. At the moment, the way it's going to decrease rather than increase. I suppose we in Teagasc are going to be pushing the idea of this farm cooperation in a big way. We have been for a long time anyway, but we're going to continue to do that. And there may well need to be a few levers pulled, maybe at the policy level as well, to support that.
Yeah, so there is potential there for a bit of a win-win situation for both sectors, as you said, if they work in cooperation.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I mean, there's plenty of tillage land that's old and tired, and needs would benefit from grassland going into that for a number of years. And on the other side, some of the grassland coming back out. Or to the other side, there's rented land out there that there may not be the overall need for somebody to come in to pay twice what people should be paying for it. Whereas a bit of cooperation between both parties would be more than enough to actually secure that land and to get the benefit of both parties in it.
Before I move on to another topic there in relation to tillage, I just want to finish up with the outlook, I suppose, for tillage farmers that are looking at high inputs this year still with a lower income. Is this something they'll just have to absorb, Michael, or do you think it will have an impact on the amount of tillage farmers or the acreage out there?
It's difficult, and look, at the end of the day, tillage farmers rely on rented land. There's a lot of rented land in the system. It's probably 30-40% of the overall land that's in there. If the margin on that rental land becomes marginal, if you like it, that it's almost not there at all. But there is a complication around entitlements involved in there as well. Hard decisions may well have to be made that it's just not worthwhile in terms of the effort. But look, there's still plenty of, and the brilliant thing, I suppose, about the Irish tillage farmers is they really are some of the best in the world. We're achieving some of the highest yields in the world, or the highest yield in the world, arguably, for wheat and barley. So technically, they're very good, and that's what's kept us as tillage farmers, or tillage farmers in industry in general, kept them at the job, is because they were achieving these very high yields year on year on year. Obviously at the mercy of the weather a little bit, but when you can, if you can bang out as we did last year, lots of farmers, in terms of winter wheat, they were closer to 5 tons an acre than they were to 4 tons an acre. you can work. There's room for maneuver.
And just with the weather there, I mean, how far along do we go with the weather before we start to get extremely concerned, Michael?
Well, I suppose a lot of people, including ourselves, could probably have written maybe in the past along the lines of that machinery is very expensive, that the overall cost to the industry as regards machinery is extremely expensive. On the other more pragmatic side of things, farmers would argue, well, hang on there now, it might be expensive, but when I want to get it done, I can get it done. And to a degree in a year like this, maybe they're borne out more so than we are. That when you do get an extreme year like this, one in whatever it is, 5 or 6 or 7, that when you have capacity there, that if you do get a couple of days, it's amazing what you can get done. So at the moment, the capacity is there or has been there to just about cope. But when you start to get all of the major spring crops coming in together and the winter crops, some of the remaining winter crops coming in around the same time, it could become extremely tricky, and it could be very difficult. And I suppose the last thing is we have on spring barley, we've had more lodging in spring barleys and crops going flat onto the ground than we have had in the past, especially the further south you go. And some of those crops will need lots of good weather to get right. You can't just 1 or 2 days is not going to be enough. It needs 4 or 5 days at least when that crop is ripe to get it to a dry enough state to actually get it into the combine.
You might see a lot of Childs of Prague, so out in gardens of tillage farmers across the country over the next couple of weeks.
I have about 4 of them, I think, in my garden already. So
there you go. There you go. Listen, finally, one topic that I just want to touch on right before we finish up, Michael, is something that is, I suppose, really impacting in Ireland of late, but it's interesting the research that's been done on it, and that's barley yellow dwarf virus. We've done a good bit of coverage on it in Agriland. Where are we with the research on that in Teagasc at the minute?
I think without being too dramatic about it, I think we're actually world leaders in kind of where we are at the moment. We have a fantastic research program here, driven by Dr. Louise McNamara, and so we have a combination of, and where we want to get to, I suppose, is so if people can envisage the end point where we're trying to get to is a really accurate local forecast as regards the risk, the overall risk to a farmer in terms of that crop in front of them, in terms of BYDV. So in order to do that, there's 3 large towers around the country with a vacuum in it, sucking in aphids all the time. Those aphids are being identified, but what we need to do is there's really only 3 aphids that are really kind of in scope that actually do most of the transfer of virus. But it's not good enough to know that. You need to know how many of those aphids are actually carrying the virus, what percentage of the population. But it's not even good enough to know that. You need to know, well, if they're carrying the virus, what type of virus is it? Because there's about 12 of them that it can actually carry. But it's not even good enough to know that. You need to know, well, how well did it transmit that virus? So it's kind of complicated. There's 3 or 4 different factors in it. But in fairness, in the technology that's being employed, along with the kind of physical bits and sucking them in and identifying them, you stick the technology on the back end of it. Some of the best techniques in terms of PCR and that kind of stuff, in terms of high throughput stuff, is being worked on as we speak. And we hope to have really an absolutely world-class prediction system, or even real-time type of system, by the time we kind of roll over another couple of years. So we're really going in the right direction with superb science, to be fair.
Well, it sounds very interesting. And as you said there, we're not being too dramatic in saying it could be among world-class research that's underway at the minute.
If not world-class, absolutely.
Well, that's all we have time for on this episode of AgriFocus. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. I want to thank our guest today, Head of Crops Knowledge Transfer Department with Teagasc, Michael Hennessy, for talking all things tillage today. Until next time, goodbye and take care.